The hall was silent except for the hum of 300 translation devices, and Arbiter Scoth was still talking. He had been talking for 4 minutes, and in those 4 minutes he had called humanity fragile, emotionally volatile, self-destructive, and dangerously premature in its arrival on the galactic stage. The grand assembly of the conclave stretched around me in enormous tiered rings, hundreds of alien species seated above and around me, and I was at the lowest chair in the entire chamber, listening to every word. My name is Ilara Voss. I was 44 years old that day, and I had spent 6 years preparing for the session I was currently watching fall apart. 6 years of memorizing protocols, practicing diplomatic forms of address, studying every recorded precedent for species membership approval in the Council's 900-year archive. I had left my daughter standing in the doorway of our house on a Tuesday morning and told her I was going to do something that mattered. I was reconsidering the word mattered. Membership denied. Scoth let those 2 words rest in the air. Humanity is granted observer status. You may attend sessions. You may not vote, submit proposals, or negotiate on behalf of any party. You may listen. We recommend you do so carefully and take the time to understand what genuine civilizational maturity requires before considering any future application. He sat down. I stood up. Protocol required it. When the arbiter closes a session involving your delegation, you stand. I pressed the activation button on the translation device at my throat. The Earth delegation thanks the Council for its time. That was the entirety of my response. Scoth paused for exactly 1 moment. I believed then, and I believe now, that he had expected an argument, perhaps an emotional appeal, the kind of display that would have confirmed every assumption already filed in his session notes under the heading of human instability. I gave him nothing. I turned and walked toward the exit. The applause behind me was enthusiastic. The corridor outside the assembly was long, pale, and cool, lit by bioluminescent strips running along the floor. My deputy, Owen Carter, fell into step beside me. He was 31, a physicist, the best scientific mind in our delegation, and he had said almost nothing during the entire session. He had taken notes instead. 4 careful pages. "Ilara," he said. "Not yet," I said. I was going to say something useful, actually. "Give me 30 seconds. He gave me 30 seconds. We walked in silence until the assembly doors were out of sight. "They did not read the geological survey," he said. "The Europa Project report. I watched Scoth's aide set it aside during your opening address, never picked it up again." "No," I said, "they did not read any of it." We reached the shuttle bay. Our vessel was modest and gray and entirely unremarkable among the gleaming ships of elder civilizations docked around it. We boarded without ceremony. The bay doors sealed behind us. No council representative came to offer the traditional departure courtesy. No acknowledgement of any kind. Kate Aldridge, our diplomatic attaché, and Carl Dennis, our xenobiologist, sat at the back of the cabin and looked at the floor. Owen sat across from me and held his notepad without reading it. Outside the viewport, the conclave station was extraordinary. 6 crystalline arms extending in every direction, catching the light of both suns, glittering against the vast dark, the center of galactic civilization, the thing humanity had been reaching toward for 200 years of exploration and sacrifice. They had laughed at us inside it. I opened my personal log. There were 43 entries since we left Earth. I had written about the journey, the first sight of the station, the preliminary meetings, the food in the diplomatic quarters, the strange and lovely binary sunset visible from the observation level. I wrote 1 line now. "Good, now they will not see us coming." I closed the log. I opened the secure communications panel and composed a single word for the encoded channel connected to Earth Command. 1 word, transmitted in under 1 second. "Acknowledged." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling and thought about 11 criteria. 11 precisely defined, carefully documented measurements of civilizational worth. I thought about the scientists and engineers and researchers back on Earth who were going to read the full session transcript. I thought about what they would feel when they read it. And then I thought about what they would do with it. "How long," Owen said quietly, "before they think about us again?" I looked out at the station as it shrank behind us. "Long enough," I said. We arrived back on Earth 3 weeks later. There was no public welcome by design, no press coverage, no broadcast announcement. We had agreed to that before leaving. Whatever the outcome of the session, we would control the message. The last thing we needed was a public conversation about rejection, while half of humanity was still debating whether the deep space program was worth the cost. The debriefing took place in Geneva. 8 people around a table. No aides. No external recording devices beyond the standard secure log. The director of Earth Command, a calm and precise man named Paul Gentry, sat at the head of the table and read the session transcript from start to finish without a change in his expression. When he finished, he set it down and looked at me. 11 criteria, he said. Yes. And specific. Extremely specific, I said. Biological longevity, political cohesion, technological breadth, interstellar infrastructure, defensive capability, economic integration across systems, cultural coherence, scientific output per population, planetary resource management, communication network density, historical stability index. Paul looked at the transcript again. They handed us a checklist. They did, I said, and they assumed we would find it humiliating and go home. Owen leaned forward from beside me. They do not know what humans do with a checklist. The room was quiet. Paul said, "How long?" I had spent 3 weeks on the return voyage working out the answer to that question. Owen and I had run projections every evening in the ship's small common room, cross-referencing resource estimates against current development curves, modeling timelines against the worst-case political disruptions we could reasonably anticipate. 25 years if we are disciplined, I said, 30 if we are not. For all 11. For all 11, and then some. Paul picked up his pen. He wrote something on the top of the transcript. I did not see what it was from where I sat. I found out years later. He had written 2 words at the top of the page in his small, careful handwriting. Start the clock. 27 years passed. Not quietly, exactly. There is nothing quiet about reshaping a civilization from the inside, but we were silent about it, which is a different thing entirely. Not one announcement on any frequency the conclave monitored. Not a single invitation to observe. The Council's automated diplomatic systems sent 4 routine inquiries to Earth across those years, and 4 times, our automated response system returned the same polite reply. Humanity was engaged in internal development and would contact the Council when relevant. The Council flagged the first response as unusual, the second as mildly concerning. The third they filed without comment. By the 4th, someone in the Conclave's Diplomatic Records Division had quietly assigned Earth a status tag that, translated directly into English, read something close to, withdrawn and monitoring. They were half right. I kept my log running through all of it. Not every day, not even every month in the busier years, but I kept it because I wanted a record that was honest in a way that official reports never quite managed to be. What follows is not a complete account. It is the parts that mattered most. Year 4, the FTL program. We scrapped the engine design we had borrowed from the early contact data exchanges entirely, not because it did not work, but because it was theirs. We went back to first principles, starting from our own physics, our own mathematics, our own understanding of how space folds under sufficient energy. Owen led the team. He told me once over a late meal in the research station on the lunar surface that the Conclave's standard drive design was like a key cut for a specific lock, and we had been trying to use it on a door it was never meant to open. The drive we built instead was not faster at first, but it was ours, and once it was ours, we could improve it. By year 9, it was considerably faster. Year 7, the longevity program. This one I watched with a more personal interest, I admit. The science was not new. We had been mapping the biological mechanisms of aging for generations. What was new was the scale of investment and the clarity of the target. The conclave had, in its session notes, listed human biological longevity as a weakness. Maximum natural lifespan approximately 80 years, declining cognitive and physical function from the mid-50s onward, high susceptibility to environmental stress. They were right that it was a limitation. What they did not understand was that we already knew it was a limitation, and we had been working on it for 40 years before they ever mentioned it. The longevity research program in years 7 through 14 was not a response to their criticism. It was the completion of work already in progress. By year 14, average human lifespan with standard medical support was reliably past 150 years. By year 20, with full treatment, past 200. I was 64 years old when the second generation of treatments became widely available. I felt 42. Year 11, the 7 colonies. We had been building them since before the conclave session, quietly, in systems chosen for their resources and their distance from any monitored shipping lane. By year 11, there were 7 functioning colony settlements, total population approaching 11 million people. Not large by interstellar standards, large enough. Year 15, the meeting that changed everything. I remember it clearly because it happened in an unremarkable conference room on a research station orbiting the third colony world, and there was nothing about the setting to suggest that the conversation we were about to have would echo for decades. Owen was there. Kate Aldridge, who had moved from diplomacy into colonial governance. Carl Dennis, who had become one of our foremost xenobiologists. And 4 others. Nora Webb, who governed the second colony, a quiet, practical woman who had a habit of solving complex problems while appearing to do nothing at all. Peter Hale, director of the Deep Space Infrastructure Program. Grace Lynn, our chief physicist. And Sam Adler, who handled trade and resource coordination across all 7 settlements. It was Sam who asked the question that opened the door. "We have been building all of this," he said, "and we have been building it well. But at some point we are going to need partners, not the council, someone else. The question is who?" I had been thinking about the answer to that question for years, since the session at the conclave, since the Thuray delegate had watched me walk out of that chamber with the expression of someone who had been in that exact room before and understood exactly what it felt like. His name was Ron. He was the Thuray delegate to the conclave, appointed 9 years before the session I attended, and he had been denied entry to the membership tier 11 times in his career. I had researched him on the voyage home. His people were small, amphibious, mathematically gifted in ways that even the conclave grudgingly acknowledged, and they had been classified by the council as a non-strategic species. Which was the council's precise and dismissive way of saying, not useful to us, therefore not relevant. We sent a message to the Thuray homeworld in year 15. It was careful and brief, and offered nothing beyond the possibility of a conversation. Their response came back in 11 days. It was 3 pages long and contained 37 questions, all of them excellent. The Marin came to us, actually. Nomadic traders, stateless, operating in the spaces between council-monitored lanes, dismissed by the conclave as having no fixed political identity and therefore no standing for membership consideration. They had been watching us for years, as it turned out. They were very good at watching things quietly. One of their traders left a sealed data packet at the edge of our third colony's communication range in year 17. Inside the packet was a simple message and a set of coordinates. We met them 3 months later at a neutral point in unclaimed space. They were nothing like what the conclave had described. The conclave had described them as disorganized, economically insignificant, and culturally shallow. They were none of those things. They were distributed, which is different from disorganized. Their economy ran on a system of trust-weighted exchange that the conclave's analysts had looked at once, declared too complex to model, and filed under irrelevant. And their cultural memory was extraordinary. They carried the history of 200 species in their oral tradition, including the complete records of 4 civilizations. The conclave had no documentation on it all. I made a note in my log that night. The council taught us who our friends would be. They would be the ones the council also forgot. Year 23. The meeting of the 7 colonial governors. Someone at that table, I no longer remember who, asked directly whether it was time to go back to the conclave. We had met 9 of the 11 criteria, and the remaining 2 were close. The argument was reasonable. We had done what they said we could not do. We deserved recognition. I sat at the end of that table and listened to the argument until it was finished. Then I said, "We do not knock twice on a door that was slammed in our face. We do not go back and ask the same people who laughed at us to stop laughing. We build our own door." The room was quiet for a moment. Nora Webb said, "What does our door look like?" "It looks like what we have been building for 23 years, I said. "We formalize it, we name it, we make it real, and then we walk through it ourselves on our own terms, and we tell the conclave we exist." Year 27. The surveillance drone. It came on a Tuesday, which I always thought was a fitting detail. A standard conclave reconnaissance unit, automated on a scheduled pass through the outer Sol system. Routine. Logged hundreds of systems per year. We had been monitoring for it. Its scan lasted 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, it recorded the orbital infrastructure around Earth and all 7 colony worlds, and transmitted the data back to the conclave's analysis division. I saw the report when Owen forwarded it to me. The drone had noted that Earth's orbital infrastructure had expanded by a factor of 38 since the last recorded survey. It had attempted deeper scans and been blocked. Not jammed, not interfered with, not confronted in any way. Simply blocked, cleanly and completely, by a shielding system the drone's analysis software could not identify or categorize. The drone's report ended with a notation I found genuinely satisfying. In the standard conclave format for anomalous readings, it filed the following: "Civilizational status indicator for subject species requires updated assessment. Suggest priority review." I read that line 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Owen with a single comment attached. "It is time." The morning I walked back into the grand assembly of the conclave, I wore the same style of coat I had worn 27 years earlier. Gray, unremarkable. I had done that on purpose. I arrived alone. No delegation, no aides, no security detail. I had filed the standard visitor notification and was granted entry as an observer, which was still the only status humanity officially held. The clerk at the entry terminal did not look up from his screen when I gave my name. Then he looked up. He recognized me. I could see the moment it registered in his expression. He was young, perhaps 20 in human years, which likely meant he had studied the record of the 2251 session as historical documentation rather than living memory. To him, I was a footnote becoming a person. He cleared his throat and processed my entry without a word. The assembly chamber was unchanged. The same crystalline ceiling, the same tiered rings of seating, the same low-tier chair in the outer ring where observer delegations were placed. I walked to it and sat down. I set a small communications device on the table in front of me and folded my hands on top of it and waited. I was 71 years old. I looked biologically to be somewhere in my mid-40s. The conclave session that morning concerned a trade dispute between 2 mid-tier members. Standard business. No one paid attention to the human sitting quietly at the observer table. Not at first. Halfway through the session, Arbiter Yin of the Felori, who had succeeded Scoth as the council's presiding officer 6 years earlier, noticed me. I saw the moment he recognized what he was looking at. He stopped mid-sentence. His aide leaned in and whispered something. Yin looked at the observer table for a full 3 seconds, which in a chamber that runs on strict timekeeping is a remarkable amount of time to stop speaking. Then he concluded his sentence, and the session continued. During the break between agenda items, a council staff member approached me and asked, with elaborate courtesy, whether I was intending to address the assembly. I said yes. He asked on what matter. I said I had a notification to file. He asked on behalf of which member species. I said on behalf of the Meridian Compact. He wrote it down, then he looked up. I imagine, I said pleasantly, you will want to verify that name. It is not in your current registry. He verified it was not. I was added to the afternoon agenda. When my name was called, I carried the communications device to the central floor. The chamber was full. Word had spread during the break. I could hear the adjustment of bodies in seats, the shift of attention, the particular sound of a very large audience deciding to pay attention to something it had not previously considered worth paying attention to. I did not begin with Earth. I began with 2 other species. The first images I projected from the communications device were population and infrastructure charts for the Thuray Collective. 12 years ago, the Thuray had approximately 40 million people distributed across 2 worlds, significant mathematical research output, and no interstellar transport infrastructure of their own. The current charts showed 87 million people, 5 worlds, a transport network they had designed themselves with collaborative engineering support, and a scientific output that had tripled in a decade. The second set of charts covered the Marin Confederacy. The Council had no existing data on the Marin that was less than 30 years old, and their old data had classified the Marin as economically negligible. The current charts told a different story. The Marin Trade Network now operated across a region of space covering 41 star systems. Their economic integration with 9 other minor species had created a trading bloc that no council member had noticed forming. Because all of it had developed along routes, the council did not monitor. Arbiter Yin leaned forward in his chair. I gave him 1 more minute with those charts. Then I said, 11 other species are currently affiliated with the framework that produced these results. I can provide documentation on all of them. I paused. Then I said, I would like to show you something else. I pressed a second control on the device. The main display screen at the front of the chamber shifted to an external feed. A single ship, viewed from a considerable distance, hanging against the dark. The analysts in the Council's technical observation gallery moved immediately. I could see the sudden activity up there, the cascade of scanning attempts, the quick exchange between operators. I had expected all of that. I had planned for it. The ship did not respond to the scans, not because it could not be reached, because the scanning frequencies simply passed through it and returned nothing usable. The hull material was something the Council's standard sensors had no reference point for. I said, that is the ECS Meridian, Earth's primary deep space vessel. It is currently positioned on the far side of your station's primary star. I did not want to park it any closer without prior notification. I understand the Council has protocols around unregistered ships in close proximity to the station, and I intended to be courteous. The chamber had gone very quiet. Arbiter Yin said carefully, "What is it you want, delegate?" I had been waiting 27 years to answer that question. "Nothing from you," I said. "I came to inform this Council that humanity, the Thuray Collective, the Marin Confederacy, and 11 other affiliated species have formalized a cooperative framework called the Meridian Compact. We are operating in this region of the galaxy. We will trade with any council member who wishes to trade with us. We will defend our borders with whatever force is necessary. We are not applying for membership. We are not requesting recognition. We are filing a notification of existence. I picked up my communications device from the floor display stand. We appreciate the council's time, I said. I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, from the far upper gallery where the smallest delegation sat, someone began to applaud. Not in the Dravith way, not in the Felori way, in the plain, simple, open-handed way that meant one thing regardless of species. Yes, exactly that. I did not look back. But in the corridor, I checked my log and made one entry. 27 years, worth every single one. I was almost at the shuttle bay when I heard footsteps behind me, measured, heavy. I turned. It was Scoth. He was older. The carapace had dulled slightly around the edges. The compound eyes were the same, though. He stopped at a distance of about 4 feet and looked at me for a long moment without speaking. I waited. He did not speak. He turned and walked back toward the assembly. I watched him go. His carapace was completely still, which among the Dravith meant something I had read about once in a xenobiology report. It was what they did when they were thinking very hard and had not yet decided what to feel. The Voreth did not announce their invasion. That was their signature. They never announced anything. They simply arrived. 4 years after I walked out of the Conclave's assembly, with a notification of existence filed in the official record, the Voreth crossed the boundary of council-monitored space, with a fleet that had been building for 6 years in a system nobody was watching, and they hit 3 worlds simultaneously within the first 48 hours. I was on the second colony when the message reached me. It came through the Compact's communications network, routed from a Thuray relay station near the conflict boundary, and it contained 2 things: a damage assessment from the first 12 hours of the Voreth offensive, and a direct personal communication from Arbiter Yin. The damage assessment was bad. The Voreth had chosen their targets precisely: 2 agricultural supply worlds and 1 primary medical manufacturing center, not military targets, not symbolic ones. They had gone for the infrastructure that a civilization needs to sustain a long conflict, and they had hit it before anyone could respond. The Council's defensive fleet had engaged and been outmaneuvered in the first 6 hours, not because the Voreth were more powerful. Because they were faster, and because they had planned for every response the Council's standard tactical doctrine called for. I had read about the Voreth. I had read everything about them, because when you are building a defensive strategy for a new civilizational alliance, you study every active threat in the region. What I had read told me that the Council had been managing the Voreth problem for 30 years by giving them slightly more space with each decade, hoping the aggressive expansion would stop on its own. It had not stopped. It had accelerated. The Voreth interpreted every concession as confirmation that the Council was unwilling to resist, and they were not wrong. Yin's personal communication was 4 sentences long. The formality of Felori diplomatic language was completely absent from it. The message read like a man who had run out of options and was aware of it. We need help. We are asking the Meridian Compact directly. We understand this is not a standard request and that the Compact has no obligation to respond. I am asking anyway. I sat with that message for 1 hour. Then I called a full session of the Compact's Coordination Council. The session took place on the Compact's Central Station, a jointly designed and jointly operated facility that the Thuray had insisted on naming the Crossroads, which I had always thought was accurate. Owen was there. Ron, the Thuray representative, who was now one of the most respected voices in the Compact's council. 3 Marin trade coordinators, Nora Webb, governing the second colony, and Connor Webb, Nora's nephew, who was 33 years old and had been the Compact's senior tactical officer for the past 4 years. Connor was the one who asked the question I expected. He waited until Yin's message had been read aloud and the Voreth's current territorial advance had been mapped on the display. Then he looked at me from across the table and said, "Why should we?" He did not say it bitterly. He did not say it with resentment. He said it the way a good officer asks a question that needs answering before any operational decision can be made. Why should we commit our forces to defend a body that denied us, dismissed us, and never once considered us worth taking seriously? I thought about the answer I had been holding for 27 years, the answer that I had not needed to use until now. Because we are not them, I said. That is the entire point. That is the only point that has mattered since the day we left that chamber and decided to build something different. We do not help them because they deserve it. We help them because the people on those 3 worlds deserve it, and because a civilization that only protects people who have already proven their worth is not the civilization we decided to be. Connor looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "What do we know about Voreth tactical patterns?" What followed over the next 19 days was unlike anything the Council's war historians would be able to fully classify afterward. I know this because I read 6 separate post-conflict analyses, and all 6 used some variation of the phrase difficult to categorize in reference to human tactics. Connor deployed the Compact's combined fleet in 4 stages, none of which followed the standard engagement doctrine the Voreth had prepared for. The Council's military advisors had been consulted and had offered a conventional response: establish a defensive perimeter around the 3 targeted worlds, push the Voreth fleet back toward the boundary, negotiate a ceasefire from a position of parity. Connor did not establish a defensive perimeter. He pulled the Compact's ships back entirely from the 3 targeted worlds during the first stage, which caused something close to panic in the Council's command center and genuine confusion among the Voreth advance commanders, who had prepared for a frontal engagement and received empty space instead. The second stage was information. The Marin, who moved quietly through spaces no one monitored, had spent 3 days mapping the Voreth fleet's communication frequencies, resupply routes, and command hierarchy. What they found was that the Voreth fleet was organized around 7 command vessels, each independently capable of directing 1/7 of the total force. Destroy all 7 simultaneously and the fleet would not collapse. It would fragment. And a fragmented fleet, Connor noted in his tactical briefing, does not surrender. It scatters. And a scattered fleet across unfamiliar space with no clear command structure becomes a very different kind of problem. He did not destroy them. He convinced them that all 7 had already been destroyed. The Marin communications team, working with our own systems engineers, broadcast falsified destruction reports across the Voreth command frequencies in a cascade that took 11 minutes to complete and another 2 hours to fully penetrate every unit in the fleet. By the time the Voreth Central Command understood what had happened, their fleet was already acting on the assumption that their command structure was gone. Units began pulling back. Others moved toward the nearest defensible positions. The coordinated offensive that had been proceeding on schedule simply stopped functioning as a coordinated offensive. The third stage was the one the analysts never quite classified. Connor sent 3 ships, not a fleet, 3 ships into the center of the Voreth formation at maximum speed. They were broadcasting on every open frequency simultaneously. Not weapons, not jamming, information. Specifically, the complete historical record of every territorial expansion the Voreth had attempted in the past 60 years, every ceasefire they had signed, every boundary they had agreed to, and precisely how many of those agreements they had later abandoned. Addressed not to the Voreth command structure, but to every other species within broadcast range. It was, in the most straightforward sense, an announcement. The fourth stage was the ceasefire negotiation, which Connor handled personally and which took 4 days. The Voreth were offered clear terms: full withdrawal to pre-conflict positions, agreement to a monitored boundary, and formal acknowledgement of responsibility for the 3 targeted worlds. They agreed to every condition. The 3 worlds were secured on the 19th day. In the aftermath, while the Council was still processing what had happened, one of their senior analysts published a restricted internal review of the Compact's tactical approach. Owen forwarded it to me. The review ran to 40 pages and spent most of them trying to categorize what it had observed. Toward the end, there was one passage that I read 3 times. It said, "The Compact's response to the Vorath offensive was characterized by a consistent prioritization of information over force, flexibility over doctrine, and minimum necessary action over maximum available power. This approach appears to be deliberate and systematic rather than improvised. It reflects a civilizational philosophy that is difficult to map onto any existing strategic framework in the Council's database. The closest analogy is a species that has extensive experience with collapse and has built its institutions specifically to prevent it. The Compact does not fight like a young civilization. It fights like one that has lost before and has decided in very specific terms not to lose in the same way again." I closed the document and sat with that for a while. Outside the station viewport, the stars were very still. I opened my log and wrote, "They finally read the report." The formal session at the conclave 3 weeks later was the first time in the Council's recorded history that an arbiter used the elder species honorific when addressing a non-council body. Yin was conducting the session. When he called on the Compact's representative to speak, he used the formal address reserved for civilizations that had been active contributors to galactic stability for over 500 years. His aide leaned in immediately to correct him. Yin raised one appendage slightly, and the aide sat back. He left the honorific in place. Connor looked at me across the room from the Compact's delegate table. He was young enough that he did not fully understand the historical weight of what had just happened. I let him be young for a moment. It was a gift. 30 years later, I am sitting at a desk in the house I have kept on Thuray Prime for the past decade, and the window beside me looks out onto a park that 3 species share without thinking about it. The Thuray children run differently than human children. Their legs are longer relative to their bodies, and they do not run in straight lines when they are playing. They spiral. A human child chasing a Thuray child in a game of their own invention looks like something choreographed, though of course it is nothing of the kind. It is just what happens when 2 different kinds of movement find a shared rhythm. I have been writing these memoirs for 2 years, not because anyone asked me to, though several people have. Because I am 113 years old and I am biologically equivalent to a person of about 60, and I know from experience that the kind of memory I carry does not keep indefinitely without being written down. Things become smooth when they are not written. The rough edges disappear. The parts that were difficult and strange and uncertain get replaced by cleaner versions that are easier to carry. I do not want the clean version. The Meridian Compact now encompasses 31 species. The Galactic Council still exists, and it is, as I have noted in official correspondence on 2 separate occasions, considerably less self-satisfied than it used to be. 12 former council members have formally applied to join the Compact over the past decade. We have accepted 7 of them. The others are still in the application process, which takes time because we take it seriously. We do not accept members the way the Council accepted members, as a ranking of worth. We accept them when the relationship is ready and the commitments are mutual. The Council's political influence has shifted in ways that its founding members would not have believed possible when I sat in that low chair in 2251. They are still relevant. They are still powerful. But they are no longer the only center of gravity in this part of the galaxy, and they know it, and most days they are thoughtful about what that means. Most days. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. It came through the Compact's official diplomatic channel, flagged as formal correspondence from the Dravith Sovereign Assembly. I recognized the designation immediately. The Dravith were Scoth's people, the ones who had rattled their carapaces in amusement while their arbiter dismissed humanity in front of 300 species. I opened the letter. It was long. Formal Dravith correspondence always is. They have a tradition of elaborate contextualizing before arriving at any central point, a cultural habit that I had spent years learning to read quickly. I moved through the contextualizing sections and reached the core of the message. They were requesting that humanity, formally, accept an apology on behalf of the Dravith Sovereign Assembly and, on their behalf, in representation of the Council session of 2251. The petition included the full transcript of Scoth's address, every word of it, unedited. They wanted it entered into the Compact's official record, acknowledged in writing and answered. Scoth himself had died 11 years earlier, at what the Dravith considered a very advanced age. He had served in the Council's senior advisory function until his last year. I had followed his career without quite intending to. He had been, in his later years, one of the Conclave's strongest advocates for what he called earned engagement policy, which was his way of describing a relationship with the Compact that was more collaborative and less hierarchical than the Council's standard approach. I had found that interesting and had never commented on it publicly. The petition was a real thing. It was not symbolic. The Dravith were asking me, specifically, to accept it and respond. It had caused a small diplomatic sensation when word got out that I intended to write back personally rather than route it through the Compact's formal diplomatic structure. Connor came to see me the afternoon before I sent the response. He was 63 years old now, with gray at his temples and a way of walking that had not changed since he was 30. He sat across from me at the desk and looked at the draft response on the screen and did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "Do you forgive them?" I thought about the shuttle ride home in 2251, the crystalline station glittering behind us, the 43 log entries I had been keeping since we left, the one line I wrote. "That is not what I wrote to them," I said. He looked at the screen again and read the response through carefully. It was 6 sentences. I had worked on it for 4 days, not because I did not know what I wanted to say, because I wanted to say it exactly right. I did not write the word forgiveness anywhere in it. I did not write the word anger either. What I wrote was this: "We understand you. You acted precisely as your history and your position made you likely to act. So did we. The difference is that our history taught us something yours did not. The species most worth taking seriously are the ones you choose to dismiss. We know this because we were one of them." Connor sat with that for a moment. Then he said the thing I had been waiting for someone to ask for 30 years. "Do you think they were right to do it? Not right morally, right in terms of outcome. If they had accepted us in 2251, would we have become what we became?" I had asked myself that question many times. In log entries, in conversations with Owen in the years before he retired to his home on the second colony and became, very contentedly, a terrible gardener. In long solitary evenings on the observation deck of the Crossroads station, watching the traffic of ships from 31 species moving through the space we shared. No, I said, we would not have. And that is the saddest part of the whole story. We needed to be dismissed. We needed the door closed in our face to build what we built instead. A universe that had been kind to us in 2251 might have produced a humanity that joined the Council and became one more voice in a very large room. Comfortable, present, unremarkable. The door they slammed gave us something they never intended to give us: direction, urgency, the absolute clarity that comes from having nothing to lose and everything to prove. "I do not recommend it as a method," I said. "I would not wish it on any species, but I cannot pretend it did not work." Connor nodded slowly. Outside the window, the park was filling with the afternoon crowd. Thuray parents watching their children spiral across the open ground. A group of Marin traders, identifiable by the pattern of their woven travel gear, sitting at one of the benches near the water feature and talking. 3 human teenagers who had grown up on this world, who spoke Thure as easily as they spoke English, who considered a park shared by 3 species to be an entirely ordinary afternoon. I watched them for a while. Then I opened my log, the same log I had been keeping since 2251. The original files were archived now, copied and backed up and stored in 3 separate systems, because Owen had insisted on it years ago and he had been correct to insist. 62 years of entries, more than 4,000 pages. I scrolled to the entry from the shuttle ride home. I read the one line I had written. Good, now they will not see us coming. I thought about whether I would change it, now that the story had run its course, whether I would add something, whether the woman who wrote that line deserved to have the final word supplemented by the woman writing now, with all the years between them. I decided she did not need any help. But I wrote one more entry beneath it, a short one, for myself and for the record and for the children playing outside the window who would inherit the galaxy we had built. We were mocked. We were dismissed. We were given the smallest chair in the room and told to sit quietly and watch our betters. And so we went home and we worked for 27 years without a single announcement, and we came back on our own terms, and we built an alliance of species the Council had also forgotten, and we stopped a war in 19 days, and we are still here, and we are still building. They called us children with fire. They were not wrong about the fire. They were only wrong about what children do with it when you leave them alone long enough. They build. Every single time. They build.